President Trump is demanding major pharmaceutical companies slash drug prices to match the world's lowest rates. So will Big Pharma comply or face the full force of the federal government? I'm Veronica Dudo. Let's find out.
This is In America Today from the Ticker News Studios in New York City.
President Donald Trump is escalating his fight against high drug prices, telling CNBC that pharmaceutical imports could face tariffs as high as 250% within the next 18 months. He says the move is aimed at pressuring drug makers to lower prices to most favored nation levels, meaning prices equal to or lower than those charged abroad. 17 major pharmaceutical firms have received letters from the White House demanding binding commitments to cut U.S. prescription costs or face consequences. The administration says it's prepared to use every tool available to protect American families from what it calls abusive pricing practices. Here's President Trump speaking about the new changes for the pharmaceutical industry.
I decided I've got to break the system. And it's the most powerful lobby in the world, the drug company. The most powerful, they are the most powerful. And I'm not saying bad, good, I'm not saying anything, but they have tremendous power over the Senate, over the House, over the governors, over everybody. And they spend more money, billions and billions of dollars. And I said, I don't care. I have to do what's right. And I declared a favored nations, most favored nations, where the United States from now on is going to pay the exact same price as the lowest price anywhere in the world. In other words, if you take... Right?
For more, we're joined by Kathleen Yeager, the president and CEO of the Center for American Medicine Resiliency. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
So this is a really fast-moving story, a lot of different breaking news. Of course, we know that the president and his team, they're trying to get a lot of these trade deals done as soon as possible. But first, what impact could a 250% pharmaceutical tariff have on drug prices and availability in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great question, Veronica. The 250% tariff actually would have a profound impact actually on American citizens and patients. And the reason is that, when thinking about what is our medicine, where does our medicine come from, you have to realize that, generic medicines actually fill over 90% of the prescriptions in the United States, and they account for only 13% of the cost. And over the last decade, actually, they brought about $1 trillion into the healthcare system in savings. And with that, India actually has provided almost nearly half of that savings. So when you're starting to think about what is tariffs going to do to generic medicines and the availability, you have to stop and figure out, is this going to be economically viable? Are we going to see higher drug prices on affordable medicine? Will they be affordable anymore? Will they be accessible? We're probably going to see a lot of shortages. And the reason I say that is that the generic industry in the United States has been unsustainable for the last basically 10 years. They've had deflationary pricing. And that's because there's some really market dynamics having to do with some heavy hitters in the system. They're called middlemen. They're the pharmacy benefit managers, as well as the group purchasing organizations. And they're heavy-handed, and then they really distort the market. And a lot of the GPOs actually underpay and overcharge the generic manufacturers. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of shortages today. And so the last 3-4 years, we've seen shortages not based upon any other issue, but for economics. And so these tariffs are going to make this even more critical, more compelling, and actually, really harmful to America's families and the healthcare system. I think the good news is that a lot of the generic manufacturers overseas, specifically India and others in Europe, all of them actually have, basically indicated a willingness to work with the U.S. government. One, in terms of bringing back domestic manufacturing to the United States, but then two, also ensuring that if you bring back domestic manufacturing, you have help because of the very razor-thin margins in these products, and help through like the Defense Production Act, and also looking at opportunities to close down loopholes that Brand Pharma has been using to delay generic competition, such as patent thickets and the like. And then also, as I mentioned, the middlemen. These middlemen basically are taking out the vast majority of the revenue out of the US healthcare system. And so at the end of the day, these are not middlemen who actually manufacture anything. They are folks that are in the middle, and they are taking over 50% of the total revenue cost. And that's just not sustainable. If you think about it, brand pharma, they actually pull 42% of that total revenue of 2023. And the generics actually pulled about 8.8%, despite being 90% of the US market. And that's a study that was done by Berkeley Research Group just this year that came out. So this is staggering information. And you can understand why the president is talking about eliminating the middlemen and going direct. At the same time, though, we also need, for the brand side of the fence, but for the generic side, we need to have more reforms that ensure access and the sustainability and affordability.
Why has India's pharmaceutical industry become an important part of the tariff negotiations between the US and India?
That's pretty simple, and the reason is they are America's medicine partner. As I mentioned, they actually provide nearly 50% of all our medicine that we use across the country. That is really going from hypertensive meds to diabetic drugs to antibiotics. And so when you're thinking about it, nearly 50% of all the prescriptions that are being filled are filled with Indian generic medicines. So that's why they are very critical to the national security of our country and also the national security of their own country as we all look to de-risk from China. So together, this is a critical issue, much like chips, much like minerals and energy and nuclear energy and defense on missiles and the like. This is right up there. This is the top 5. And so medicine really is a national security asset, specifically generics. And that's why they are so important.
In other words, the world certainly learned a lot during COVID and, of course, afterwards in terms of looking back at things that they could change. Something was about, of course, the supply chain and with pharmaceuticals and access. What do you think of the proposals by the Trump administration to make more pharmaceuticals in the United States?
I think it's a great proposal. I think the industry, generic industry, and the brand industry support it. It, again, as I mentioned, it's a national security issue. So bringing back domestic manufacturing is certainly essential. The question, you have to ask is, what are the right policies? Are we really trying to, derive the right policies to get that end? And the question really comes down to, for the generic side of the fence, tariffs may not be the answer. As I mentioned, for brands, sure, I think that probably works quite well. And that tariff actually will force the brand industries to come back into the United States. On the generic industry, because of our competitive untoward market situation, those tariffs are really going to not have that profound impact in terms of really reshoring. What we need to have instead is more partnership resiliency efforts, and looking at opportunities for public-private partnerships, long-term purchasing contracts through the federal government, through Medicare, VA, TRICARE, and even Medicaid, really trying to drive generic utilization, and then also making sure that its economics actually work for the companies that are bringing back and reshoring these products.
Now, of course, we did hear from the president talking about pharmaceutical companies, and they're really in the crosshairs potentially of this broader tariff conversation. Do you think pharmaceutical companies might respond by moving more production to the U.S. to avoid the tariffs?
For the brand side, we're already seeing a lot of movement. On the generic side, we're seeing a lot of willingness and really a lot of willingness to work with the U.S. government. I think everyone understands it's a national security matter, and it's very important to both the United States and to all our allies that we work together. And so you're seeing companies reach out to the U.S. government, and the government reaching out to the companies and trying to determine how they can move forward. But again, what we need to see is under this public-private partnership, we need to see reforms to the generic sector to ensure sustainability and ensure that it actually will have national security long-term. So we'll have a sustainable generic industry and we'll have sustainable security.
might these proposed tariffs affect U.S. patients who rely on imported medications?
Well, this is going to be the interesting piece of this puzzle here, because right off the bat, for those the tariffs that are going to be passed through are going to be passed through, and unfortunately, at higher prescription drug prices to the consumers and out-of-pocket expenses and higher premiums. And on the generic side, there's a real big question about whether or not you're going to see major shortages here. And the question is, to what degree? We know that shortages are going to increase substantially, but to what extent is unclear. But all of that will have a major impact on the accessibility and the affordability of affordable medicine to the United States patients and to the healthcare system.
Kathleen Yeager, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Veronica. Appreciate your time.
This is Ticker. We'll be right back.